So first of all, today is Yud Zayin Teves, and today's the yahrzeit of Rav Yaakov Krantz, better known as the Dubno Magid. I was going to give you a marshal about what it's like to have a yahrzeit on Yud Zayin Teves, but I couldn't think of one. But I'm sure the Dubno Magid would have one.
I never knew his name. Thank you, Yosy.
Okay, gewaltig. His name was Rav Yaakov Krantz. The other interesting thing that happened on Yud Zayin Teves was the very first building that was built specifically for the purpose. Thank you, Mati. That was built specifically for the purpose of being a shul was the lot was bought. So Congregation She'eris Yisrael purchased a lot in Lower Manhattan to build the first building that was ever designed to be specifically a shul in North America. Now, any other shuls that were there until now, they bought a different building, they repurposed it. Here they bought land and they were going to repurpose it. And in fact, they were the only shul in New York from 1664 until 1825. And today, She'eris Yisrael has a huge building at 70th and Central Park West. And I don't know my Manhattan shuls, but it's Congregation She'eris Yisrael. Okay, so we're back at the Mishnah. A Matzorah, someone who sees a nega on his body, there are certain simonim that will instantly condemn him to tumas muchlat. And there are those that put him into a situation where he has to be observed. So he's locked up for 1 week, and then the Kohen sees if it spread or if it got worse. And if it doesn't, then he's locked up for a second week. And again, the Kohen comes to check to see if it spread or if it got worse. And if it didn't, then he is free to go. But of course, he does need a certain process of tahira. And the Gemara is going to be describing and engaging in understanding the differences in the Hilchos Toma and other things that they have to do and how they become tahar. So the Mishnah says, Ein bein mitzorah muskar, a mitzorah who's not really condemned yet, rather he's just under observation. The mitzorah muchut, there's no difference between them. La priya uprima, and the pasuk says vatzaru asher b'ay nega, the person who has tziras begad of you ferdumim. His clothing have to be torn. He needs to grow his hair. And he has to call out to people who approach him to stay away because he's tamei. So that's the only thing that the muchlat has to do. But all their other hilchos toma, they're the same. Now let's look at the process after they get healed from their tuma. What's the process in being mitayr them? So the second halacha of the Mishnah is ein bein tar mitachesker, or tar mitachesker. There's no difference in the process to be mitayr somebody who was just locked up and under observation versus the higher process of someone who actually had tzaras and then got healed. The pasuk says that we have to bring in addition to the other korbanos, there's 2 birds that are brought, and the mitzvah has to be completely shaved. That process only applies to someone who is a mitzvah muchlit. Someone who is only under observation and then got cleared wouldn't have to go through that process. Let's see the Hilul Gemara right there. Thank you, Mati, again. I see that it lasted for 45 seconds, the Suwar Midi. So okay, I'm not going to. We'll just get fixed. Okay, so let's see the Hilul Gemara right there. Halin Shaluach, referring back to the first half of the Mishnah. There's no difference between a Mitzvah Muskar and Muchlat besides Priya and Priya. But Lishiluach, the fact that they can't be in the Machana, they have to be moved out. And Vituma, the fact that they're Tumah, obviously. Rashi says it means Kol Chomer Tumah Hamur Mitzvah, all the Chomers of the Tumah that applies to a Mitzvah, which will come out soon in the wash. Zev is a Shavin, they both have the same halacha. So they're both the same Tumah. So whether you're under observation or you're actually condemned, you're still just as Tumah. The only difference is the Priya. Rashi says the kasha is, since we're going to see Lamudim, the Torah is going to tell us that even a muskar has all the chomer hatoma and shiluach of the Mitzvah, why would you say that Lagabi Priya and Priya they're different? Once you say they all have the same level of tuma, why don't we say that they're identical across the board? The Tanya Reb Shmuel bar Yitzchak Kamed Rav Huna. It says after the observation period, if the kohen was able to be matar, the person who had the nega, it says v'tihare hakohen mispachasi. It's only mispachas, meaning a non-malignant, benign type of tzuras. The chibes begadov, and the mitzvah has to wash his begadim. He has to toivel. V'taher, not v'yitar, and he will become tamei. By the v'taher, he is already tamei. So he's going to go to the mikveh, and he's already tahor. So clearly, the pasuk is trying to tell us not about his condition after he's matar himself, but it must be talking about a condition that even before he was matar, while he was still muskar, he was tahor. What could the pasuk possibly referring to? That would be in the past. Zok the Gemara, it must be in tahor priyo prima. He must be tahor from the fact that he didn't have to do priyo prima. So the pasuk is addressing him. The tihar hakohen mispachas v'chibus begadov, and by the way, the tahar, the tumah of priyo prima, he never had. He was always tahar. Amalei Rava, if that's how you're going to approach anytime you see the word v'tahar, that the Torah is not talking about the future, rather the Torah is telling us about something in the past, well, don't think that it doesn't say v'tahar anywhere else. It actually says v'tahar by Ezov. Elamayata gabe Zov d'chsev v'chibes begadov v'tahar. By Ezov, it also says v'chibes begadov v'tahar. It says v'chiyita Ezov mizoyvei v'sofer lo shivish yomim v'tarasoi v'chibes begadov v'rachas b'sar b'mayim chayim v'tahar hasa mai v'tahar mei karika. By the Zov, there is no condition that we could be referring to, that the Torah could be referring to in the past that he was tahor from. So you cannot learn that the word v'tahar is referring to something in the past. You have to say that the Torah is referring to something in the future. And by Zov, which is where we're just brought the pasuk for, elatar hashta milatame klicheres beheset. Afal gab dadachazi loy mitama lemefer. So we're talking about a Zov who had to count Shivanakim. We say mixes a Yom Kula. So the seventh day in the morning, he can already go to the mikveh and be matar himself, provided that he remains Torah until the end of the day. So what would happen if the Zov went to the mikveh the seventh day in the morning, and now he's Torah, and then in the afternoon, he sees another Riyah. So that's Soisher all of the 7 days Lemafreya, and it's as if he was never matar himself. And he has all of the Tumas back. Except, since the Torah said V'tahar, the Torah is saying that there's one thing that he remains Tahar for, up until the time that he had a Riyah. That is, there's a special Chumrah by Zov that doesn't exist by any other Tumah anywhere in the world. And that is, if a Zov moves a Klicheres, the Klicheres becomes Tumah. And that's a unique Tumah that only applies to a Zov. And it happens to be taught to us in the Pasuk right before this pasuk where it says v'chibes begada v'tahar. So the Gemara says that v'tahar is saying that although every other tumah, if the Zov sees later on in the day on the seventh day, it's l'mafreya soiser everything, and it's as if he was a Zov all along. Lagabe this special tumah of being mitama klicheres beheset, will say that once he toivel on the seventh day in the morning until he actually saw ziva. If he moved the klicheres in that period of time, in those few hours, that keli will remain tahor. But once again, the v'tahar is referring to the time after he did the tefillah. The v'tahar is referring to something in the future. So hachanami, back to our v'tahar, where after 2 weeks of observation, the Torah says v'tihari hakohen mispachasi v'chibes begada v'tahar. It's not addressing his rules, his situation pre the 2 weeks, meaning during the 2 weeks, without pre and prima, can't be referring to that. Rather, it's referring to something else. It's tar hashta milatama babia lumafreya. There's a special chumrah by a tzarua that if he walks into a house, everything in that house becomes tamei. So the pasuk tells us that after 2 weeks, if the kohen says he's okay, he'll toivel. And then what happens if after he toivels, he walks into a house full of kalim or other people? They're going to be tar. Now, what if the tzaras now comes back same day in the afternoon? Zok the v'tar, If you don't say it's Lemafreya, he was always a Matzorah, rather during that window, the Tzarua will not be Matama everything in the house. But once again, the Matzorah is going on something in the future after he told he's Tahar from being Matama Babiyah. Which means we do not have a source to tell us why a Mitzvah Muskar is not Mechuyev in Priya Uprima. Because our argument is if the Mitzvah Muskar has all of the Chumras and all of the Tumas as a Mitzvah Muchlet, he has to be sent out of the Machana. Why should he be exempt from Priya Uprima? Unless the Torah tells us that Beferish, and so far we have not been successful in finding a limit in the Torah that tells us that. This is where we know that a Mitzvah Muskar is not Mechuyev in Priya Uprima. Because when the Pasuk discusses the halacha of Priya Uprima, the Pasuk is very specific as to who it should apply to. And the Pasuk says, Vatzarua asher bay hanega, the person with the tzaras who has a nega, only that person, the God of you frumim v'roishi yefura. But anybody who doesn't fit that description of the Hatzarua asher bay hanega would not have to be Mechuyev in Priya Uprima. So let's see how the Gemara describes what this condition is. Vatzarua asher bay hanega, and we darshan mishet tzaraita tluya begufay. Who is Mechuyev in Priya Uprima? Someone who is Tuma and his Tzaras status depends completely on whether or not he still has the infection or whether or not the infection has been healed. So it's totally in the physical condition on his body. Yotzazeh, this excludes a Mitzvah Muskar who's just there under observation for 2 weeks. Whether or not it heals on his body is irrelevant. He's going to remain in his status of Muskar for the period of time that was designated, 1 week at a time. So he's not a Tzarua asher bay hanega. A Tzarua asher bay hanega is someone whose condition depends on whose status depends on the condition of his physical ailment. A Muskar, his status is not conditional upon what's happening with his ailment. He's there for a fixed amount of days. So he's not considered a Tzarua asher bay hanega, and therefore the Begad of Yufurumim and the Rosh Yufurua will not apply to him. Zokt Abaye, Amar le'Abaye, if you're going to make such diyukim, we might have another problem. Elamayata, the pasuk says by nega, kol yimei asher nega boy, only while the physical element of nega is actually upon him, yitma, he should be tamei, tamehu, bada jeshev, mechus l'machna ma'shavai. So by your logic, that someone who's inflicted dafka by the physical is mechuyev in these things, well then, kol yimei asher nega boy also seems only to refer to somebody whose condition depends on his physical infection and not on time. And maybe the Lagaber Tuma and the Shiluach Chutz Lamachna, maybe that should also only apply to a Mitzvah Muchlet and not a Mitzvah Muskar. So, and that's not true. So our Mishnah says, of course, that the Mitzvah Muskar also is Tamei and he's also sent out of the Machna. So are you also going to make the same argument? Only somebody whose status depends on his physical ailment, on that condition. But someone who's there for a period of time because he's muskar, are you going to say that ain't ton shiluach? Are you going to argue that? And if you actually try arguing that, that's contradictory to our Mishnah. So now we have a problem because you want to say Hatzarua excludes a Mitzvah Muskar, well then Kol Yimei should also exclude a Mitzvah Muskar. Amalei, no, Yimei, Kol Yimei, L'Rabbis Mitzvah Muskar. If it would say Yimei Asher Nega Bayitma, then in fact I would make the same argument that a Mitzvah Muskar should not be Mechuyev in Bada Jeshev and in Tamehu. However, it says Kol Yimei. Kol is a ribui to include additional people that would otherwise not have been included in the rule, and therefore we say Kol includes a Mitzvah Muskar is also going to be Tomei and also is going to be sent out. Correct the Gemara. Ihachi taglachas etziparim, my time alone. We also said on the second half of the Mishnah that when it comes to discharging the Torah, taglachas v'tziparim is something that only applies to a Mitzvah Muchlet, but it doesn't apply to the higher process of a Mitzvah Muskar. Why not? Your logic is that if they're the same in any other way, they should be the same for everything, unless the pasuk specifically tells you otherwise. So why is it that you're making a distinction between a mitzvah muskar and a mitzvah muchlot regarding taglachas v'tzipor? Dikatani, because the end of our Mishnah says, "Ein vein Torah mitoch chesker, the Torah mitoch chesker, ela taglachas v'tzipor." So you see that a mitzvah muskar does not have taglachas v'tzipor. I'm sorry, you don't need a reboot because we already made a statement that once the Torah says that a mitzvah muskar and a mitzvah muchlet is the same lagabe tumah and lagabe shaluach, they should be the same lagabe everything unless you have a miyat. It's the same muskar and muchlet as we were talking about before. So in the logic, the Gemara makes the assumption, as Rashi says right after the Mishnah, that once you say they both need shiluach, they both need tumah, then we have to assume that they're the same for everything unless the Torah specifies otherwise. And in Lagabe Priyu Prima, the Torah specified Vatsarua. Where did the Torah tell us that a Mitzvah Muskar does not require Taglachas V'tzipor? So Amar Abaye answered, Amar Kra, it says in the Pasuk, V'yotza HaKoyin al Michutz LaMachane, V'ra HaKoyin v'nid nirpa nega atzaras v'natzarua. After the Kohen sees a physical condition as having been healed, then he does this process of the karbonos and the taglachas. So let's see the Gemara inside. Who has to go through this process of taglachas v'tziparim? Someone whose tzaras is dependent on his physical condition that has to be healed. The trigger to do any entire process is not v'nirpa nega tzaras. It's the fact that his observation period has come to an end. Okay. So just to recap, we have a Mitzvah Muskar, a Mitzvah under observation. We have a Mitzvah Muchlat, a Mitzvah that's really Tameh. There's two differences between them. A is the Mitzvah Muskar does not require prima, and we learned that from the pasuk of Hatzaru Asher Bo Nega. And then the next difference is he doesn't need Taglachas V'tzipurim because the pasuk says only with the refuah do you trigger the only with the refuah do you trigger the chi of karbonos and taglachas. And as an aside, we picked up some extra information. A is that someone who has tzaras is mitama anything in the house that he walks into, and B is that a zov has a special tumah that if he moves a klicheres, he makes that klicheres tamei, and that's something unique to a zov that doesn't exist anywhere else. Let's see the Gemara about it. Ein bein svarim, yes. I'm not sure what you mean by the evidence. If you walk into a house, everything in the house is tummy. Okay, but if it turns out that he does not have tzaras. No, while he's musker, he has a status of vadei tamei. Even if at the end of the observation period he's freed, but during that period it doesn't change his status. During that period he was tamei. Okay, but if we find at the end of that period that he becomes tar at the end of the period, then he becomes tar moving forward only. We will never find out that he was not a Mitzvah retroactive. We'll free him now moving forward. But during those 2 weeks, he's considered completely tamei, no matter whether he's discharged at the end or whether he's condemned at the end. Those 2 weeks, he's a bona fide Mitzvah. Yeah. So let's see the Gemara about it. Ein bein svarim l'tefillin u'mezuzos. There's no difference in the halach of how you write svarim to tefillin and mezuzos. Elisha svarim nichtavim b'chaloshen. So the Torah, the Nevi'im, and Ksuvim can be written in any language. With tefillin and mezuzos, eina nichtavos ala shuros. Tefillin and mezuzos can only be written in Hebrew.
Are we talking about script or language?
That will come out clear. I'm being purposely vague.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. On the different exams. So Shmuel is recommending, and I recommend every day, you listen to Dr. Henry Abinson. He's a rabbi doctor. He's a historian. Oh, really? Wow. Okay, anyway, I got to move because we didn't start today's daf yet. It's already 6:23. So let's go weiter. So Dr. Gemara, even svarim that they allow in languages other than Ashuris, it's only Greek that is allowed. Dr. Gemara, you're saying that the difference is only in how they're written. Ha, l'toifran begidden. The toifran begidden. The halacha is that tefillin and mezuzahs have to, the sections have to be tied together with sinews. You're telling me how the toifran begidden, ulatamis hidayin, zev shavan, will both be the same. So you're saying that a Sefer Torah also, its sections have to be tied together with sinews, and Rashi tells us that that's not unanimous. There are people who say in Maseches Makos that you're allowed to tie the sheets of parchment together for a Sefer Torah with pishtan. So our Mishnah seems to indicate that the panels of a Sefer Torah have to be tied together with sinews. So here's where we're going to drill down into what the b'chalosh means. How could you tell me that svarim could be written in any language? We learned a brisa that says mikra shekosov targum, a pasuk that you wrote in targum. And Rashi tells what it means is sefer shekosov b'lashon hakodesh haroyu lichtov b'mikra kosov lashon harami. So a sefer that should have been written in Hebrew, like parts of the Chumash, that you wrote in Aramaic. So you wrote the Torah in Aramaic, or v'targum shekosov mikra. Or if there's a part of the Torah or any other sefer that is Aramaic, and you wrote it in Hebrew, and Rashi gives us an example in the Torah of such a word. Rashi says, "V'targum show you roll lichtoy boy targum." And what's the word? Yigar sadusa. By Lavan, they call it Yigar sadusa. That's an Aramaic word. And what if you wrote that in Hebrew? Kos v'mikra. If you wrote in Mikra, I'm not sure what the translation would be, but Yigar sadusa is an Aramaic word. So that's another word. Galit. Oh, that's what it says. Galit. Right.
It's already translated in the Torah.
Yeah, but
Lavan called it Yigar Sadusa,
I'm not going to call it Galit.
right.
Right, but the thing is, what if you wrote Yigar Sadusa in Hebrew? Right, so you wrote a word that was supposed to be written in Aramaic, and you wrote it in Hebrew. Or Ksav Ivri, right? Einay Metamas Yadayim. That's not considered a bona fide sefer, and therefore it will not be Metamas Yadayim. What does Ksav Ivri mean? Rashi says, Oishlashinas Aloshin. You didn't change the language. Aloshinas Ksav. Shekosas the Ksav shall Evar Enor. So this is what David Dot was referring to. Not only if you change the language is it a problem, if you change the way it's written from one font to another font, that will also ruin the Sefer Torah. It has to be in the Kshav Ashuris, which is how we write our Sefer Torah today. Ala Sefer on the proper parchment, uva the yoy, and with the proper ink. So this seems to contradict our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that Svarim are nechtavim b'chaloshain, and even Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says at least Yavanis is allowed, and this brisa says that they all have to be written exactly in Lashon HaKodesh. Amarava loy kasha. It's not shver. Kan v'gufan. When do we say that it's possible? That if it's begufan. I'm sorry. Kan begufan shalonu. Kan begufan shalohen. When do we say it's kosher, even though it's a different language? That's if you used our ksav. But if you use the wrong ksav, then it's going to be us. So kan begufan shalonu must listen to katani b'chaloshan. When our Mishnah says that a sefer is kosher if it's written in any language, that means you still use the proper Hebrew letters. Shaloshinis aksav, Shaloshinis haloshin. And we all know when you go into Borough Park, you have a big sign that says fresh, pei reish ayin shin, baked, beis yud yud kuf dalid, bread, beis reish ayin dalid. So you go to a bakery, it'll say fresh baked bread. That's kosher because as long as they wrote it in the oisiyos that are kosher. So if you go to a shop in Toronto and it says basar, then it must be okay because it's written with Hebrew letters. So if it's written with Hebrew letters, even though the Hebrew letters are spelling a different language, that will be kosher. But if it's not written with Hebrew letters, then it will be possible. So again, everything you see comes from the Torah. That thing we used to make, because growing up as kids, we would make fun when we went to Borough Park and we saw the signs that had English spelled out in Hebrew letters, right? We used to think it's funny. But you see, there's merit to it. A Sefer Torah can be written that way. So surely you could write on the front of your store, come shop here. Kuf mem shop shin pay hey yidresh, come shop here, right? These are the ways to do it. So there's nothing wrong with that. So but Mayu Kimto Lahi, you explain the brisa that says that it has to be written 100% properly. Otherwise, it's not kosher. Is the guvan shalahan when you use their alphabet. So Oibazoi, my area mikra shekasu targum, the targum shekasu mikra. I feel a mikra shekasu mikra. Even if you wrote the word exactly as it's supposed to be written, the targum shekasu targum nami, it should also be possible because you didn't use the right font. The katani achichtevenu ashuras ala sefer b'deyai. So why are the examples given in the brisa of the things that are possible are the language changed? That's not relevant. The psul is only because the font, the print has changed. So therefore, you cannot for your teretz. So we have to have another teretz. The Mishnah that says that if that svarim can be written b'chaloshin is the Rabbanan. The brisa that says it can be written b'chaloshin is going according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Frank Gemara, that makes no sense at all because Reb Shimon ben Gamliel doesn't allow any lashon; he only allows yavanas. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel ha'ika yavanas. So how could you say any lashon is not good? He holds that yavanas would be allowed. So that's rejected as well. So we have two terutzim that went out the window in half a second. Ela loy kasha, we have to have another teretz why our Mishnah says svarim could be nichtavim b'chaloshin and the brisa says not. Kan b'svarim, kan b'tfilin umezuzos. Our Mishnah is speaking about svarim is nichtavim b'chaloshin. The brisa that says everything has to be written perfectly, that's by tefillin and mezuzos, where even our Mishnah says tefillin and mezuzos have to be written 100% properly. Tefillin and mezuzos, my time. What is the reason why by tefillin and mezuzos it has to be written 100% exactly the way it's written? Is mishum dechsiv v'hu. There's a pasuk that says it in Krishma, which is in tefillin and mezuzos. It says v'hayu hadavarim ha'ela. V'hayu means v'avyosan yuhu. You have to write them precisely the way they're found in the Torah. Frankly, if that's the case, this brisa gave me a whole bunch of examples of things that weren't appropriate. For instance, if you had Targum Shekos Mikra, you had a pasuk that was supposed to be Targum, if it was referring to the Torah, we had a perfect address, it was Yigai Sadusa, and you wrote it in Hebrew. In the parashas of Tefillin and Mezuzos, where is there a word that's supposed to be written in Aramaic that we could possibly write improperly as Hebrew? My Targum Shekos Mikra Ika in the parashas of Mezuzos and Tefillin, Bishlam Torah Ika Yigai Sadusa. Elahacha, my targumika. So therefore, we now have to reject this teretz as well. We cannot say that the brisa that's very strict about Dafka Hebrew is referring to tefillin and mezuzos, because one of the examples it gives as a mistake is impossible to occur by tefillin and mezuzos. Elakaja kam b'Megilla kam b'Svarim. What the brisa was talking about, that it has to only be written in Hebrew, that's referring to Megillah system. Megillah, my time. Why by Megillah does it have to be written only in Hebrew perfectly? It says in it, there we learn it has to be exactly the right print, the right language. Zok Gemara, my targum, shekasvei mikra. Where in the Megillah do you find a word that was written b'lashon targum that you could possibly mistakenly write in lashon hakodesh? Papa, it says v'nishma piskam hamela. The word piskam is an Aramaic word. It says v'chal noshim yitnu yikar lebalein. The Hebrew would have been covered. Rabashi Omar, Rabashi says a different teretz. He doesn't want to learn that the brisa that makes everything possible is speaking by Megillah, like the teretz we just had. Rather, he says kitanya he, the brisa that tells us that it has to be exactly perfectly written is b'shar svarim. It's referring to other svarim, not to Sefer Torah. Rabbi Yehudi, and it's going to follow the shita of Rabbi Yehudi. And let's see who Rabbi Yehuda is. The Tanya we learned, tefillin and mezuzos ein nichtovim ela ashuros. That we have in our Mishnah. But the Brisa says, "Rabbi Seinu hitiru Yavanos." We know the Rabbi Seinu is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Seinu hitiru Yavanos. I v'aksiv v'hayu. How could you say that by tefillin and mezuzahs you could write it in other languages? It says v'hayu. Ela ema svarim nichtavin b'chalash. The Brisa must mean not tefillin and mezuzahs, but the other svarim of Tanakh can be written b'chalash. Rabbi Seinu itir Yavanis, and the Rabbanon were matter Yavanis. So let's understand what's happening. Everyone said it's mutar b'chaloshin, and the Rabbanon said Yavanis. What does that mean? Does it mean hitiru machlal the Tanakama asar? Are you saying that the Tanakama holds it's nichtavim b'chaloshin and not Yavanis, and the Rabbi Seinu say it is Yavanis? That doesn't make sense. B'chaloshin means b'chaloshin. So what is this machloikis over here by svarim if it's b'chaloshin or Yavanis? Ala'ema Rabbi Seinu lo yitiru sheyichtavu. We have to say that the Tanakhama says Svarim Nichtavim B'Chaloshin, and the Rabbi Seinu, referring to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, said no, Svarim not Nichtavim B'Chaloshin. Svarim can only be written in Yavanis. If they're not going to be in Hebrew, they can be in Yavanis, but in no other language. The Tanya we learned, we're still looking for our Rav Yehuda here. The Tanya Rav Yehuda, Av Keshetir Rabbi Seinu Yavanis, even when the Rabbanim were Matar Yavanis, Lo yitiru ela b'sefer Torah, u'b'shemaisa the Talmud HaMelech, which now gets us off into a very fascinating story, a tangent. So Rabbi Yehuda says that when the Rabbi Seinu were Matar Yavanis, when Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was Matar Yavanis, it's only by a sefer Torah. But by all other svarim, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel holds it has to be written exactly like tefillin and mezuzahs, exactly in Hebrew with the right font. And the brisa that we learned on number days that says all svarim have to be perfect, and you cannot change a language, you can't change anything, it's going to follow Rabbi Yehuda's understanding of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who is only Matar Yavanis by a Sefer Torah, but not by other Svarim. So now we have a whole bunch of different cheetahs. We know everybody agrees Tefillin and Mezuzahs has to be written perfect. Other Svarim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, has to be perfect, and not according to Rabbi Yehuda, other Svarim and the Sefer Torah, none of them have to be written perfectly. They can be written in other languages as well, and Shimon Gamliel only allows Yavanis. Now, why would a Sefer Torah be different than the rest of the Sfarim, and that a Sefer Torah can be written in Yavanis, according to Shimon Gamliel, according to Rabbi Yehuda's understanding, but not any other Sefer? So tomorrow, a special exception was made for a Sefer Torah because of the famous story of Talmud HaMelech. The Tanya we learned, Ma'asav Talmud HaMelech, and I believe he was an Egyptian king. Shekines Shivim Ushnayim Zekenim, he took one at a time. Neither one knew about the other one. 72 zakenim. V'chnisan b'shivim u'shnayim batam. And he isolated them into 72 separate offices. V'lagila lahem al makinsa. And he didn't tell them why he was gathering them, so that they might have an opportunity to discuss a strategy that they can all stick to before. It's like when someone made trouble in school and you know you're going to get interrogated about a principal, before you go into that meeting, you strategize what everyone's going to say to make sure that no one gets tripped up on a lie. So it has to be done very organized. Talmud didn't want to give the Talmidei Chachamim a chance to strategize and make their story uniform, and therefore he took them without knowledge and he locked them all up. And then when Nichnas Eitzel Kolechet Vechad Amalem, Kisvu Li Toras Moshe Rabbeinu. You need to write Moshe's Torah. Now, there's many things that when we learn the Torah we can handle, but there's a lot of things that the Goyim wouldn't be able to handle for various reasons. And therefore, they had to modify their interpretation of the Torah so that the Goy won't be able to make a mistake with it. But they all had to modify it in precisely the same way, otherwise it would look like a fraud. And there was a nace that everything worked out, even though they didn't have WhatsApp. So Nasan HaKadosh Baruch Hu believed Kol Echad Ve'echad Eitzah. Hashem put the same idea into everyone's mind. The Skimu Kulan L'Dasach. So they all wrote the identical pairs. And the following is the list of the mods that they had to make.
Someone said they would have been put in the same room. We all would have come up with the same thing.
That would be a big nace. Oh, very good. Very good. You heard what Mati said? The Zoomers hear what Mati said? It would be a bigger nace if you put them in the same room and they all came up with the same opinion. That would have been even a bigger nace. But Talmud never went to the mikvah, so he didn't know. The Chaz V'loi. So this is what they wrote to him. Instead of writing Bereshis Bara like him, where he would say, oh, Bereshis must be some uber god, And Bereshis, the Uber God, created the Rabbanu Shalom. Instead, he wrote Elikim Bara Bereshis. And that's how Rashi understands this. Then, instead of saying Nasa Adam B'Tzalmenu, which sounds like Hashem has buddies, they changed it to Esa Adam B'Tzalam, so it should look like there's Hashem HaChodesh Mayachad. It says Vayechal B'Yom HaShishi. We say Vayechal B'Yom HaShvi. The problem is if you say Vayechal B'Yom HaShvi, that means Hashem himself did malacha on the seventh day, and he stopped doing the malacha in the seventh day. That means he was doing some malacha, and then he stopped. And that is true, because what Hashem did on the seventh day was he created manucha. Rashi tells us. But the guy wouldn't understand that, so therefore, for the guy they wrote Vayechal B'Yom HaShishi. Then it says Vayishba and Vayishba B'Yom HaShvi. It says Zachar in the cave of Bar'am. So you would think they would have thought that there were two Zacharim and two Nekevas made. That's why it says Zachar in the cave of Bar'am. But like Hasu Bar'am, when Hashem went to deal with the Dara Flaga, it said Hava Nerda Vaval. Hashem also said it Lashon Rabbim as if we're going to do it. They changed it to Hava Erda Vaval Hashem Sfasam. It says Vatitzchak Sarah Bekir Balemer. Sarah laughed inside, in privacy. The problem is, they would have a problem. Why is it that Sarah got punished and not Avram? Avram also didn't believe that it was going to happen. Avram also found that it was funny, right? It says, Shalayomer al Avram lo hikmet. Why is it that Hashem wasn't makbid? What's it, male chauvinism that Avram got away with it? Because it says Vayitzchak, Bal Sarah hikmet. So that's why it says Vatitzchak Sarah bikroiveha. She laughed amongst her relatives. In other words, she publicly expressed doubt, and that's why she was punished and not Avram. Kiva apam hargu shar. What does it say by Shimon and Levi? It says kiva apam hargu ish. So they changed it kiva apam hargu shar uvertoinim akru evos. Rashi tells us shalayoymar, so that the king shouldn't say that even by your account, Ratzchanim hayu avoseichem. Your fathers were murderers. Shere'evim meir aliyim. Your own father, Yaakov Avinu, is saying about his own children, Shem harguish. So therefore, lakach kasru shar. They wrote shar. Now everybody knew they killed Shechem. So this is a fascinating line in Rashi. Yaakov said, a man they would never kill, but the people of Shechem, they were humans, they were animals. Shalei hayu chashuvin be'enov elok behemus, and therefore v'lehikbud ala behemus. So the king of Paratamai, if Yaakov would have said they killed men, that would have been terrible. But since he says they killed behemoths, meaning the only reason why Shimon and Levi killed Shechem because they were valued as behemoths, that's not a problem. Interesting. It's interesting the psyche in those days, that as long as they're considered subhuman, then I don't look at you so bad for murdering them. But if you consider them human and you kill them, that would be worse. What? The Nazis did exactly that. That's right.
But this is according to the bracha that Yaakov gave at the end of his life. But what about the real story is earlier, and it says they killed Hamor and Shechem and the whole city. That's explicit.
Yeah, we know they did it. Rashi points out is that they did it is one thing, but that their father testified that they did it, that's even worse.
What do you mean? He knew they did it. In the story, in the actual story.
That would have been Talmai's issue.
What do you mean he was made? He knew about in the story. He knew about it.
I understand that.
So that's a made itself.
But by the fact that Yaakov said sure was less of a problem to Talmai Amelech, because it told him that Yaakov wouldn't have been so happy had they just willy-nilly murdered a human. When they murdered Shechem, he was a behemoth. He's someone that even maybe Talmai would agree deserves death. So that doesn't make Shimon and Levi so bad. It minimizes the avla. You're not a murderer. You're someone you're a justice seeker. Vayikach Moshe es ishtoi v'espanov vayarkivim not on a chamor. It says al Moshe b'nei Adam, on human carriers. This sounds like critical race theory. It sounds like a wokeness. But what Rashi tells us is the wealthy had camels. Only the schleppers drove the chamoras, right? You drive if you had a horse or a donkey, if you had a horse or a camel, then you're a somebody. Ford, you're somebody, but you just drive a donkey. Pah. So therefore, in order not to minimize the respect for Moshe, they vagued it out as to what type of vehicle to use. Then it says, Moshe b'nei Yisrael, asher yoshevu b'Mitzrayim, uvishar aratzois arba me'yishana. They stuck into vishar aratzois, because if you make the cheshbon, Klal Yisrael was only in Mitzrayim 210 years, but they were out of their land for 400 years, so they stuck into vishar aratzois. Then it says in the pasuk, "Vayishlach es atzilai b'nei Yisrael." It says, "Vayishlach es nari b'nei Yisrael." This is by the Seres HaDibros, by Maimon HaSinai. It says they sent the nari b'nei Yisrael, which is inappropriate. You should be sending the cheshuvim, not the nari b'nei Yisrael. And then later on it says, "Velatzila b'nei Yisrael l'shalach yadoi," and the chashuv people from Klal Yisrael weren't hurt by the kedusha of the mountain. They changed it to "Vayishlach es atutei b'nei Yisrael." The reason why they did it is because someone can argue that it's not respectful, but by Matan Torah you send the nair, you send little children, you should be sending people who are older. And Zatute is a word that could mean older and younger. So therefore they weren't lying, but the king would have interpreted as older people. Okay, let's see what else they changed. They made a lot of changes. It says, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Loi chamor echad mehem nasasi. I didn't take a chamor. If he would have said that, then Talmud would have said, oh, but he probably took everything else from them. So that's why they changed it to Lechemed Echad Mehem Nasasi. I took nothing. The next one was Asher Cholak Hashem Alekecha Itam Lahar L'Chol Am. So this is talking about a potential for Avodah Zarah. It says Uventisa Hashemayma V'Ra'isis Hashemis Haseyareach Vesakechovim. You might look up and see all these celestial beings called Tzva Shemayim, and that'll cause you to go off the derech from Nidachta. You'll mistake them as gods, and you will serve them. Hashem gave these sun, moon, he gave us all these things. So might seem that Hashem wanted them to be kings, and they should service them. So that's why they changed it. Their purpose is only to give light, not to be a god. Because otherwise, okay? So we'll go weiter. I wanted to mention something, but we have to go weiter. Then we have the other one was because for law, instead of using the word arneves, which is a rabbit, which happened to have been the name of Talmai's wife, they didn't want to use the description for the animal rabbit. They didn't want to use Talmai's wife's name because it would be insulting. So therefore they wrote a rabbit that has short front legs, shorter than its hind legs. But like arneves, they didn't use the word arneves, and they don't want them to say that the Yehudim are making fun of me. And they put Shem Ishti b'Torah, and they put my wife's name in the Torah. Okay, very good. I never knew that X1 was pronounced chi. I just learned that right now. Rab Shimon Gamliel Omer af misvarim le'yitiru sheyichtavu el yavanos. Amar bo Rabbi Yochanan halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my Talmud Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. What is the reason why Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel allows yavanos over every other language? Amar Krah, because the pasuk says yaft elakim liyefes. It was Noach who said it, right? Noach said yaft elakim liyefes. The yishkan ba'al Hashem. Yefes will rest in the Gitzel, in the tents of Shem, meaning the Varav Shal Yefes, the language of Yefes, you Bal Shem, because we allow them to use Yavanis when they write Sfar. There's many other descendants of Yefes whose languages could have been adopted other than Greek, like the language of Gomer and Magoi. I think that's Hungarian and Polish, but I'm not sure. It says those words, Yaft Yefes, Yefusas Shal Yefes, the most beautiful language of Yefes, Yehei Bal Shem. And there's nothing nicer than a language that's full of upalupalises. So that's why that's what got picked. That's right. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Ein gein koyin Meshuach b'Shemen HaMishcha leMeruba b'Gad. The Shemen HaMishcha was hidden away towards the end of the first Beis Hamikdash. I believe Rashi tells us it happened during the reign of Yoshio Hamelech, and therefore the Kohen Gadol at that time was Meruba Begadim. He still wore the Begadim of a Kohen Gadol, but he didn't have the Mishcha. He never was Nimshach with the Shemin Mishcha. So there's no difference. They both have the full status of a Kohen Gadol, except Elapar Haba Akol Mitzvahs. If the Kohen Gadol does an Avera, a Chai B'Krisus, so he paskins wrong that a Chai B'Krisus was mutter, and then he was over that Avera, he has to bring something called a Parabah Kol Mitzvahs. And that only applies to someone who is a Kohen who was Nimshach B'Shemin HaMishcha, because it says, in a Kohen HaMashiach Yechta Lashmas Hayom. So the Pasuk speaks out that he was Nimshach, and therefore you need to have, need to be Nimshach to be Mechuyev in Tiskar. Otherwise, it means a regular Chatas. Ein ben Kohen Meshamish LaKohen Sha'avar. What happens if on Yom Kippur the Kohen becomes possible? So they put another Kohen in his place. And it's not only Yom Kippur. I picked Yom Kippur because we went to the Numa. And then the original Kohen becomes a good again. So you got to demote the other Kohen. So the Kohen HaMeshamish is the active Kohen, who's the real Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Shavar was the substitute who now has been removed. So the only difference is Par Yom Kippurim Vasir Sefer. The Par Yom Kippurim, you can't bring two of them, you can only bring one. So therefore, only the active Kohen will bring it. And the Chavitin, every day the Kohen Gadol brings a Mikras Chavitin, half in the morning, half in the afternoon. It's only one per day, and therefore that would be brought only by the main Kohen. Zok Gemara, in the first half of the Mishnah, where it talks about the difference between a Kohen who didn't have the Shemin HaMishcha, it says the only thing that he's disqualified from is Par Haba Kol Mitzvahs. Halin Par Yom Kippurim Vasir Sefer. But Lagabi Halacha of Par Yom Kippurim and the Michas Chavitin, Zev is a Shavin, even the Kohanim, the Gedolim in the second Beis Hamikdash, who were not Nimshach B'Shemin HaMishcha, brought the Par Yom Kippurim and they brought the Michas Chavitin every day. Zok Gemara Masnisin the Loik Rav Meir. Our Mishnah will not be consistent with Rav Meir. The Rav Meir, if you want to argue that our Mishnah is going like Rav Meir, the Tanya we learned Meruba Begadim Mevi Par Haba Al Kol Mitzvahs. Divrei Rav Meir. Rav Meir holds a Meruba Begadim will bring a Par Haba Al Kol Mitzvahs. Our Mishnah says that a Meruba Begadim does not bring a Par Haba Al Kol Mitzvahs. Rav Meir says a Meruba Begadim does bring a Par Haba Al Kol Mitzvahs. So our Mishnah clearly is not consistent with the Meir. The Chachamim Oimrim Einay Mevi. The Chachamim, like our Mishnah says, that a Meruba Begadim cannot bring a Par Haba Al Kol Mitzvahs because it says that Kohen HaMashiach. My time with your Meir. What's the Svar of Meir who says that even though you're not Nimshach B'Shemin HaMishcha, you can still bring that carbon? The Tanya we learned Mashiach Ein Li Ela Mashuach B'Shemin HaMishcha. Meruba Begadim Minayin. How do you know that a Kohen who only has the 8 Begadim but he never got Nimshach B'Shemin HaMishcha? How do you know that he also brings such a carbon? HaMashiach. Since it says HaMashiach, that extra hay is marba, not only a Kohen who was Mashuach B'Shemin HaMishcha, even if not. So you're saying that our Mishnah is inconsistent with Rav Meir because Rav Meir holds in the ratio of our Mishnah, he argues, and he holds that a Kohen and Meruba Begadim would bring the Par Haba Al Kol Mitzvahs. Well, let's see if the Seifa is not like Rav Meir. Ema Seifa. It says Ein ben Kohen Mishamish LaKohen Shavar Elapar Yom Kippurim V'Asir Seifa. Halachol Devran. Gabi any other halachas Zev is a Shavin. Also in Rav Meir. The second half of our Mishnah will only be consistent with Rav Meir. So the first half of our Mishnah is not consistent with Rav Meir. Yet the second half of the Mishnah is only consistent with Rav Meir. The Tanya we learned, Ir by Psol, if the Kohen became possible, the Kohen Gadol became possible, Uminu Kohen Nachar Tachta. And then they appointed a backup Kohen Gadol to take over. And then the first Kohen Gadol got back fit for his position. So Rishon Chazul Avaydasai, the original Kohen Gadol gets his job back. And Sheni, the second one, Kol Mitzvahs Kuna Gedolah Alav, the Reb Meir. He could do everything. Our Mishnah says he can't do everything. I'm sorry. I take that back. Okay, we're going to say that the Sefer is only consistent with Reb Meir. So let's see how the Gemara fears out. So Reb Meir says all of the Mitzvahs Kuna Gedolah are on him. Reb Yosy Omer, Rishon Chazul Avaydasai. The first Kohen Gadol could go back to his avodah, but Sheni Einay Royu Loy LaKohen Gadol V'Loy LaKohen. The second Kohen, the guy who filled in temporarily for the Kohen Gadol, he loses everything. He can't be a Kohen Gadol, nor can he be a Kohen Hedge. The Omar Rabbi Yosy, and Rabbi Yosy shared a story to prove it. In his days, the Kohen Gadol became apostle, and he got that great appointment to temporarily take over for the Kohen Gadol. And then the Kohen Gadol came back, and now he's out of luck. The Chacham said, what are we going to do with him now? The first Kohen Gadol goes back to his avodah. Sheni, the guy who stepped in this case it was Rabbi Yosef ben Ulam, he can't do anything. Kohen Gadol he can't be Mishum Eva. How is that going to make the other Kohen Gadol feel? That you're trying to infringe on my Kuna Gedolah? So we don't let him feel like a Kohen Gadol. Kohen Hedjit, we can't let him feel like a Kohen Hedjit. Once he's already Mishamas B'Shemayin Begodim, his avodah will be possible if he dresses like a Kohen Hedjit. So because of that, he can't do any avodah at all. But according to a mayor, he could do avodah. According to a mayor, he could do al avodah. And what does it say in our Mishnah? It says, "Amen." But according, which is only good according to Reb Meir, because according to Reb Yosy, there's many differences between the two kohanim. The second kohen can't do anything at all, right? So it must be only according to Reb Meir. So are you suggesting that the Reisha is not like Reb Meir and the Sefer is like Reb Meir? Are you going to say that Reisha Rabbanon, the Sefer Reb Meir? Is that what you want to say? That's exactly what I want to say. If you don't like it, too bad. Reisha Rabbanon, the Sefer Reb Meir. We could solve it. We could bring in a third-party subcontractor. It's Rebbe. Rebbe's a third party. He's not Reb Meir, he's not Reb Yosy. In the Reisha, he felt that he wanted to paskin like the Rabbanon, and in the Sefer, he felt like he wanted to paskin like Reb Meir. So Rebbe can pick and choose the shittas that he wants to hold up. Okay, I think it's very late. We have to stop here, but we finished most of the blot, so we're not so behind. So mission from tomorrow, we'll start by ending Bama Gedolah, the Bama Kana.
Go ahead.
Yes.